away you go.
Oh,
You
right,
hold
okay.
that there, and away you go.
Right, just getting some.
You can talk on hands-free.
Right.
You can talk on hands-free.
I'm just getting some technical advice here about this.
Talk on hands-free.
Yeah.
That's very complicated.
Right.
Right, you can just talk like
Right.
that. You just hold there like that.
Okay.
Just talk normally
Right.
to the phone. You can be here.
Sorry about that. Basically, we're here to actually interview you about your new orchestral album. So I think the first question is, when did you actually start to consider an idea of a follow-up to 7?
Well, I suppose it's sort of, been in my mind ever since I finished 7 that I would want to try and do another one, because I felt I learned a lot on that project, and I felt that I could certainly do a more complete piece than I did then, just because, there's so many things I didn't really understand until I got in the studio and realised what was happening and everything. And as you know from before, I had to do it twice really. 7, sort of 4 of the pieces ended up being done twice, which was kind of taught me a lot in itself, really. So this time I went in much better prepared. But I mean, I hadn't got anything concrete written, and it was really during the last tour that I felt it's the usual questions, when they ask you at the end of a interview, sort of, well, what are your plans, and Phil would say this and Mike would say that, and I sort of thought, well, I'll just say I'm going to do another orchestral album, and I had actually no specific plans to do it, but I knew it was something I would be doing in the future, so it would kind of answer the question.
Yeah, and basically you've decided to do it this time over in Prague. Any particular reason for using the Prague Philharmonic?
Well, the main reason, I suppose, really, because I knew that I could get a lot more time with them for the same money. I mean, making these things is quite expensive.
Yeah.
And I just, I had an experience with the LPO was they were good orchestra and everything, but it was all the time was a big factor, and I didn't feel that the orchestra was all that excited by it. And so I just sort of thought, well, there's no reason to go that way again. Let's try another. And a lot of people have recommended me this Prague route, said that that they're very good players. You could obviously do the thing a lot cheaper, which meant that I could have much more time to rehearse and everything, which is what I really missed last time. Just being able to kind of do, the first thing you've got to be able to do is you put the scores in front of them and get rid of all the bum notes. Surprising how many of those sort of come through, with all the process. I mean, so that takes quite a long time, actually. So if you're doing a session of a sort of hour and a half for one piece, 10-minute piece or something like I did last time, you'd probably take about the first hour just correcting the typos before you even had a chance to consider whether they were playing it right or whether your arrangement was sort of working with the orchestra you had in front of you and everything. Mm-hmm. So that was the thing I did. I had a sort of day to go through all the pieces, which was very, very useful just because they only had to play it almost once through to get to see what all the mistakes were. So that could all be dealt with. And then you could also make some sort of judgment on other things as well. And we just found that it made so much difference, really. We had a day, and then we gave ourselves about 3 days between that rehearsal day and session starting to redo the scores to get them correct and everything.
Yeah.
So that all worked very well. And to be honest, the orchestra, there's much more enthusiasm, I think, for the music there. They were more excited by the idea. There were a lot of people in there who were sort of Genesis fans, I suppose, which helps quite a bit. And, it was in a very much happier experience.
Yeah. Obviously, I know that Anthony, Mr. Phillips, has actually used the same orchestra recently as well. So.
Well, that's right. I know that, yes, because he was very keen on some trombonist, I think. Some female trombonist.
That doesn't surprise me.
I know no more than that. But, yes, no, he has used them. And I think they are used. I use them really because, they've been recommended a few times. But Paul Englishby, who was the, conductor and helped with the arrangements on this, he'd been there before and done various TV things and stuff there. So, and he said it was a good way to do it.
Yeah. And did you find that your compositional methods changed between doing 7 and doing this new album?
Not so much the compositional methods, more the certainly I took it to a further degree in the demo form, definitely. The main, I suppose, the big difference in terms of composition really would be the fact that I decided to do 2 pieces which were led by a solo instrument. Someone had recommended to me, suggested to me at least, the idea of using a saxophone. And, I hadn't really thought about it much, but I found a sort of a fairly cheesy saxophone sample on one of my keyboards and sort of doodling around on top of something else I'd done, and I sort of thought this was sounding quite good. So, and then, I have been, I've worked with Martin Robertson before, and he's a close friend, and I've known him for years, and he's a very, very good player. So if I was going to use sax, he was the man to do it. And once I decided to do a sax piece, I thought, well, maybe, it'd be fun to try and do another one as well. And the violin being the obvious choice because it's the most expressive, I think, of the classical instruments, and it obviously more similar to what I've done in the past in terms of some of the synthesizer solos and also with guitar solos as well. You know, it's the most emotive, I suppose, of the instruments. So that was a different kind of challenge, and those two pieces, you know, were kind of great fun for me to do, really, and sort of, you know, just sort of playing around and seeing where they developed. And they probably, in terms of the way they ended up on the record, I kind of adapted them a lot more from what I originally did, purely because, you know, when you write for a lead instrument, the backing becomes a lot less. You have to, particularly with classical orchestras, you've really got to cut down what you do behind. You know, you can't do what you do in rock music, which is, you know, if you want a flute to be kind of fortissimo over the top of a full band doing drums and guitars thrashing away, you can do it because you can do it artificially, but with an orchestra you can't do that. So you have to sort of really calm the backing down quite a bit, which was quite a discipline, which was quite entertaining to do, really, and to find out how spare you could make the accompaniment but still get across what you were trying to get across with the full arrangement.
Yeah, so did you start off with piano or keyboard demos for this one, or did you actually have the orchestra in mind right from the word go?
I always knew I wanted to do it for an orchestra, but to be honest, the piece, particularly the sax piece and the violin piece to some extent, were both kind of piano-based to begin with. The sax piece, the piano was very much sort of, you know, the melodies and everything were sort of within the piano part, really. It's kind of, obviously embellished somewhat when I did it with the sax, but sort of the idea was all there. Whereas the violin piece was done much more like, you know, like we did some of the old Genesis things, where we had a sort of a background, you know, a sort of basis going, and then I just improvised on top to see what would come. And, you know, that was quite sort of quite a different thing for me to do. But I mean, I use piano in, you know, it's often part of them. I mean, there are two or three pieces that had never had piano in them, I suppose, on this. I like to try and improvise, you know, using the synth, particularly just a string synth, which stops me being able to play fast, and because it has a much slower attack, and it makes you sort of play a different kind of way. And I suppose most pieces end up being a bit of a combination of the two.
Yeah, and basically, how much did you actually play on it this time round?
I didn't play at all.
Not at all?
It's been my ambition ever since I came into this business to not play on something I wrote. Because I never intended to be a player. I always wanted to be a writer, you know. And of course, you know, through the early days of Genesis in particular, everything was focused on my playing rather than writing, partly because we you know, attributed everything to all of us, if you like. And there always was a slight tendency, I suppose, to, I mean, for whatever reason, to overemphasize the role of the singer in the group and everything as writer. So I had to sort of make the most of my playing, in a sense, and that became what I did. But I always, you know, would love the idea of just being able to write and just to listen to it, you know, and to not be involved in that way. I played a little bit on 7 because we'd always intended a little bit of piano to be there, and we didn't record it at the time of the orchestra, but it wasn't terribly important. To be honest, if it wasn't there, you wouldn't really notice it. Most of the pieces, it could have been dispensed with. And this time I just thought, well, get rid of this. No piano, not by me, not by anybody, and see what happens. And I sort of found that very refreshing, actually.
Well, yeah, well, obviously it must make things easier for you if you don't actually have to do it yourself per se.
I don't have to get nervous in the studio. You know, everyone else can get nervous, and I can just sort of say, no, do that again, you know, which is always quite fun.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, it's a different thing, but it changes the way you feel about a thing slightly too. The whole perspective is different. You're there as you've got no axe to grind, obviously, in terms of your own playing. Not that I did on 7 either, really. You just, you know, you can judge the thing as a totality and how close it is to what you originally intended.
Yeah. And can you tell us a little bit about each of the tracks? Because I've only heard the snippets so far, so can you give us a bit of a run through a bit of the background to each of them?
The snippets, I know that for some reason or other, I think the Carol and Tony decided that was how they're going to do it. Then very soon you'll hear the whole thing, I'm sure. Well, I gave the things all titles because people insisted on that. I kind of wanted to call them sort of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6.
Yeah.
It wouldn't let me do that. or even just call them Adagio or whatever, you know. But I couldn't do that either. So I thought, really, given the sort of structure of it, it's sort of to justify the two solo-led pieces, I thought if you just made it a kind of simple sort of story idea, so you had the two solos being the two main protagonists, and I thought the sax was sort of more female, seductress type figure. So I called that piece Siren, which is what opens it.
Uh-huh.
And then the third piece, which is the violin-led piece, was the kind of the male protagonist who I saw as a kind of dashing knight. So I call that Blade. So those two kind of set it up, and the rest of them are kind of story pieces. You know, to go through the pieces, as I say, the opening piece is the sax-led piece, which is, you know, perhaps, I mean, I think the two solo-led pieces are perhaps the easiest to hear first time, you know, because they've got quite strong melodic lines and everything, and you know absolutely what you're supposed to be listening to, if you like. And, you know, they kind of quite direct, and I think the people who've heard it so far, they sort of seem to speak most direct. So they're kind of, the second piece is perhaps the oldest of the pieces. It was sort of was something I was kind of fiddling around with at the end of 7. It's the only piece really that dates from anything before the last couple of years, really. I felt that I didn't need it on 7 because it, you know, the ideas weren't very far developed, and so I was able to develop it much more. And it's more in keeping, I suppose, with the ideas on 7. It's kind of a totally orchestral piece, quite slow, but builds to quite a big climax. The sort of strong change from minor key to major key just towards the end, sort of like, which is supposed to uplift the spirits, but who knows. So the third piece is the violin piece, which is pretty fast actually, although it's not as fast as I originally wrote it. Because of the computers and everything, I was able to be extremely fast on the demo, which sounds quite spectacular. But when it actually came to the recording, we decided to take it back a bit because although the soloist could probably have played it, the rest of the orchestra might have struggled a bit. And it didn't really need to be that fast, to be honest, and it sounds good at the speed it is. But I'm quite surprised when I hear my old demo, just how fast it is. Then the other three pieces, well, the fourth piece, which is called Wild Pilgrimage, because if anyone's interested, it's because there's an artist, illustrator, a chap called Lind Ward, who did a series of books in the sort of, well, from the late 20s actually through the 30s and right through to the 50s, of stories without words, which he did in woodcut form, which are quite strong images, which I always liked a lot. And one of the books was called Wild Pilgrimage, and since it was supposed to be this part of the story I saw as a kind of, you know, journey, trying to find out something, then it seemed an appropriate title. It's very much a song of piece. I mustn't say song anymore. I have to say piece or movement is what I'm supposed to say, I think. This movement has two distinct halves. The first half being, again, a bit more pastoral and quite sort of, you know, strongly melodic. And then the second half is sort of a sort of triplet rhythm creeps in without you kind of really expecting it, and it changes it quite a lot. It becomes quite triumphant and sort of exuberant, I think. To be honest, this is probably my favourite of the pieces. I don't know really. I haven't quite decided. I change my mind all the time, but it's quite a sort of up and quite long. The penultimate piece is called Oracle. The Oracle, which is sort of like a contemplative piece before the sort of big one at the end, which is the simplest piece on it. Just a couple of very quite simple melodies with little embellishments on them. You know, quite interesting harmonically, I think, but the actual top line is sort of played by various wind instruments, and never gets very loud. It's just sort of like a peaceful piece. And then the final piece is called City of Gold, which of course recalls those people, students of Genesis and Tony Banks' work, know was the sort of start and destination of the character in The Trick of the Tail. Which is sort of an El Dorado, which was what it was intended to be originally. So when I wrote Trick of the Tail, it was the idea of kind of someone getting bored and leaving a place that was, in a sense, sort of perfect, and then going somewhere else and finding out that wasn't so perfect, and then obviously going back to that sort of City of Gold at the end. So the City of Gold is sort of like a destination, if you like, a sort of kind of El Dorado, a sort of a perfect destination. So that's sort of what the thing is about. So it's a quest, if you like, for a result like that. And the final piece is probably the most ambitious of the pieces, and it's between this and the fourth, which is my favourite. I was quite pleased the way this one turned out, because the final piece on 7, Spirit of Gravity, which is supposed to be quite a intense piece, I didn't feel really worked. Some bits worked, some bits didn't. It's kind of got a bit bogged down towards the end with the main theme, which ended up being played extremely slowly and without half the parts there because we couldn't get the orchestra to play them. So it was a little bit unsatisfying, this. Whereas this one I sort of is a similarly ambitious piece that kind of I think sort of works and builds to quite a big climax. And so I actually end with a sort of a big ending, which is quite good really, as opposed to sort of petering away to nothing, which is what I have a tendency to do. So it's but it has one or two sort of slightly kind of first time you hear it has a couple of chords in there that kind of will definitely make you sit up and listen. I think some people just say that's typical Tony Banks moment.
That's what we like to hear.
Julia, when you're not expecting it, but but I think it's quite it's supposed to be arresting to sort of like because it's going along in a certain kind of way and this happens. I mean, there's lots of little, quite nice little harmonic things. It's harmonically the most complex of the pieces, and in fact, it's quite doesn't have as much repetition really. I mean, it goes through I suppose all the main pieces twice, but it's quite extended. It does take more than one listen, I think, to appreciate, which is the great advantage of recorded music over the old guys who definitely had to be sort of enjoyed first time.
I mean, basically, do you ever see yourself or these pieces and the pieces from Seven being performed in the live context?
Well, there's a lot of talk about it, really, particularly with Six. I think it's. I mean, I'd love to do it, really, in a way, but it's a question of you've got to feel. It's quite a big organisational thing. Again, it's a financial question of whatever, and whether you can get the audience and all the rest of it, and how many shows do you do more than one? Do you do it in different countries? I'm waiting a little bit just to see the first stage, because if I could have got it all together on release, it would have made sense. But I thought, since I can't do that, I might as well just see a little bit how it goes down, I suppose. I say Classic FM seem quite keen on it this time, which is
that's good.
Which is good. And they're going to give it quite extensive play. I actually started playing it already, in fact. And they're going to, on the week of release, they're doing a record of the week and stuff. So it kind of, a good chance for people to hear it this time a little bit. Because I thought with last time with Seven, although the people who heard it, a lot of people quite liked it, but it was difficult to sort of reach people who weren't sort of inclined to sort of do any searching, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, well, obviously I go to quite a few orchestral concerts myself with the Philharmonic Orchestra in Liverpool, and I know that the orchestras are always looking for new pieces to commission. So it'd be interesting to see if anybody's brought to the attention of the guys in charge of that.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, it is true. In fact, they have been recommended to me as an orchestra as well. In fact, even for the recording, they were suggested to me. So I mean, there are these kind of orchestras who are looking for stuff, and it's obviously if someone else is prepared to put it on, it takes a lot of the onus off me.
Of course,
it's the point of if you're putting it on yourself, it's the whole thing is on you.
Yeah.
Whereas if an orchestra or a promoter or someone else thinks it's it's worth doing, that's why I'm sort of waiting to see a little bit, see if you get any kind of response. Then someone might say, well, it'd be nice to do this, or at least do part of it, or whatever, within a concert. It is a lot easier for me, really, in a way. I sort of, it's I'm still pretty green to this world, the classical world, as opposed to there's quite a lot of snobbishness and everything out there.
Absolutely,
it's quite difficult to get over all that. I say Classic FM are very keen on this, but when we approached, there was some vague approach made to Radio 3, and they dismissed it without even listening to it. They're not prepared, just not going to be on their radar. Simple as that. So you kind of, where you start a little bit, and the same with, you'll get the same response from some reviewers and some people within the world.
Exactly.
But on the other hand, some areas, some people seem to, be more open to all this kind of stuff, and it's so we'll see what happens.
Well, that's the whole idea.
Changing a little bit because more people, there is more stuff happening, and I think people just felt that there's only so many times you can play the Enigma variations. Is that really? You've
that's very true.
Search elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean the thing is, this music and the music of Seven, I've said it ever since I first heard Seven. It would lend itself enormously to part of a program for an evening with an orchestra, not necessarily the whole thing, but a couple of movements, because it's individual. It's valid as individual music.
Yeah, I think it's certainly that's what I would have thought. Certainly, I hoped maybe someone would just say, well, let's do one of the pieces, and obviously Black Down, I think was definitely the best piece. I would love to have heard that within an orchestral setting, within a kind of concert which had lots of other stuff in it. Really, I'm not, because if you play just your own stuff, you're going to get a certain audience. Whereas often when I go to classical concerts, and I'm sure it's the same for you, you may go to see one specific piece, but sometimes one of the other pieces that actually really stands out for you, and it introduces you to other things. And I think it's more interesting to program a thing rather than just do a kind of all one person, type concert.
I mean, that's what I love about it. It's even after all these years, it's still an adventure. You just don't know what might take you completely by surprise.
Well, that's
And
right.
I'm sure that
So
this
much,
stuff
and
would do the same.
I was acquainted with kind of a lot of composers and stuff. So there are people you hear and don't even know about. Really, you go there and you think, well, that's really interesting. And even some things are actually really fantastic, and other things that just are really interesting. I mean, you can be surprised, as you say.
Precisely. I mean, if in terms of production or anything else, has Nick been involved with this one, or?
Yes, well, Nick was probably the only person who kind of carries over between the two projects, really. Certainly at all the creative stage. Yeah, I mean, he's been a great supporter, and he likes what I do, so he's always a good sounding board. So you kind of know a little bit where you are with him.
Yeah. And how did you get in touch with Paul Englishby?
Well, it was interesting. Really. Martin, Robertson, who I obviously see him socially quite a bit and everything, and he said, if you're going to know one, he really recommended this guy. He'd worked with him a few times on film scores and stuff. He said, if you're looking for a different arranger, and I said, well, I don't know really. I hadn't really thought about it. I was very happy with Simon Hell, but I thought, well, there's no reason to use the same person again. And he suggested Paul, and I met him actually at Martin's wedding. Third wedding actually. But he was there, and we talked and got on quite well and stuff. And I just said, well, if I do it, I can give you a call. He said, yeah, I'd love to do it. Anyhow, I sort of then contacted him about a year later and sort of said, do you remember when you made a rather drunken sort of statement that you might be interested in doing this and everything? And he was up for it. And I think he found it. I mean, he's a pretty good composer. I mean, he's a very good composer himself and everything. Does film music and stuff, and obviously a great arranger and things. And I think he was quite surprised. This sort of quite involved music for him. I think he was to do arrangements. He normally does. He's doing it for sort of simpler things, but for doing sort of something like this, it was quite involved music, and he had to, and he worked very hard on it. And we did a lot of going backwards and forwards this time, which I didn't do so much with Simon. So he'd do his first draft, if you like, and then I'd come back, and there was always quite a lot to say after the first draft. Chord protection being a very sort of early thing that I had to do, but then also just getting the arrangements so that it was happy. A lot of the arrangement ideas were in the not so much for the solo pieces, but for all the others, it's pretty much. You heard the demos, you'd say, well, it's pretty close, really. But he can do things. He just understands the orchestra in the way that I don't. Every little nuance and stuff, and all the ranges and what they can do and what they can't do, and how things fit together, and possible kind of orchestral combinations that wouldn't occur to me.
So that must have made things a lot easier for you, really, knowing full well that he could take care of, if you like, the technical issues of the orchestra.
Yeah. Well, also having him as the conductor was fantastic, because that was another problem last time. Not that Mike Dixon was fine as conductor last time, but it was just really, you didn't just another person to communicate with, really. Whereas I could talk directly to, Paul and I could thrash things out together, so we knew exactly what we were aiming for. So when he got in there and he was, doing the conducting, we could talk to each other, and we knew what we were talking about, and it didn't have to sort of go through a sort of another process. So that was it was a very good thing, and the session was fantastic fun this time, really. I mean, I thought things sounded really good quite quickly and quite easily. I didn't have that come away that awful feeling that this and that and everything. And even when we got it all back and listened to it again, I mean, apart from one or two speed factors, I was very happy with the results. I still am. So that's, whereas with 7, I was, a couple of pieces I was pleased with, but the rest of them I was, varying degrees of slightly disappointed, and just sort of felt that it could have been better. Whereas this time I sort of feel it's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, basically, a couple of people have asked about the artwork for both of the albums, because it is rather striking. Did you use the same artwork?
Same artist. Well, it's a guy called Stefan Knapp, who actually used to live about 100 yards away from where I live here. And but I didn't really know him at all, but I got to know he died a few years ago now, but his widow is a friend, and we'd sort of been around there quite a few times, and I'd seen this stuff, and I just thought, they're kind of, the 7 picture I saw in a sort of, she had a slide of it and stuff, and these pictures originally kind of quite large acrylic square paintings, so they're sort of perfect, really.
Yeah.
And they're quite bold design, so they reduce very well.
Yeah. So they're existing artworks then. They're obviously, if Stefan's been deceased for a while, they're obviously existing artworks that you've used.
Existing artworks in both cases, but he did quite a lot. And the first one I was looking for something which had a slight sort of pastoral edge to it, but perhaps not totally straightforward. And I thought, the sort of scene he had worked like that. And this one I wanted to be slightly more kind of a little bit less pastoral, a bit more, so slightly more of a cityscape feel about it. You know, the blocks in a bit in the same way as the kind of the blocks worked in the domino kind of visuals on the last show, which I was very keen on all that. You know, and I love the way that we changed the sort of, you know, by changing the way up they were. They looked like buildings one moment and then dominoes and blocks the next. You know, and I just like that effect. So it's quite a sort of abstract view. City sort of view, and the picture originally had 6 blocks in it, and I thought, well, that's perfect, you know. So, you know, it's another one. I mean, I don't, you know, with that sort of, it's, and, you know, the colour-wise, it's perhaps a little more similar to the other one I perhaps wanted it to be, but that's how it came, and I think it's a very striking image, and I think they have quite a strong atmosphere with them, and that's why you like to use them.
Yeah, and how long did it actually take you to put the album together?
Well, I actually finished recording the thing about a year ago now, and the mixing was done a sort of month or two after that because Nick was on holiday somewhere. So we probably finished it in sort of like late May. And it's just really, I suppose, you know, we sort of, you know, weren't quite sure whether we were going to put it out ourselves without a record label or whether we were going to go with another record label. And it ended up sort of with Maxoff again. And by the time we decided all that, it was kind of getting too late to put it out at the end of last year. And, you know how things are. It just sort of ended up being too late. I would like it to be out, really, because it's, you know, until you got it out of your system and out there, it's difficult to think about anything else, really.
Exactly.
But it's, so prior to that, you know, it took about, I suppose, in terms of writing and then recording it, sort of a year and a half, I suppose. The actual recording sessions took a week, I suppose, the rehearsals plus the recording.
That's frighteningly quick, really.
It all took about sort of 2 or 3 months. But the main writing was all done in the sort of summer before, over a period of about 3 or 4 months. And I, you know, had probably a more creative period, most creative I've had for a long time, actually. You know, certainly probably since sort of back in the 70s, when, you know, when things were sort of coming thick and fast. It just, you know, it was really no effort and a lot of fun. So it kind of, it was a good you know, good time.
And finally, I think the question that most of the fans, me included, do you have any future plans, either of your own or with the other band?
Well, with Genesis, I mean, obviously, you know, Phil is kind of he's fairly indisposed these days, you know, and both physically and mentally, I think, to doing anything. I think Mike and I would always be happy to sort of, you know, we can say that now, we feel with impunity because we feel we're never going to be But, you know, I mean, Mike and I have always been up for it, and I know that, you know, if you're talking about the other band, well, you know, the thing with Peter, he's sort of like, you know, about 10 years ago, he seemed reasonably keen on the idea, and then I think he actually thought about it and realised it would mean that he would have to sort of start sharing creative opinions again with other people, and it was probably too much for him. Obviously, Steve, I'm sure would always be up for it, really. So, you know, I can't, I think, in all honesty, in all fairness, to say that I think the chance of anything happening is very small. Whether anybody ever works with anybody again on some sort of project, I have no idea. I mean, Mike and I see each other a lot. I see no reason why we mightn't do something. But I can't see it involving Phil.
That's a shame. But I say, obviously, I understand his problems at the present moment, but we live in hope.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, I never say never. I mean, God knows, you know, I was quite surprised we did the last one, actually, because I didn't think that Phil would ever want to do it, but sort of, you know, suddenly was keen to do it, you know.
And it was a rather splendid. It was, if you that's how you went out, then at least you went out on a high.
Yeah, well, I was very pleased to have done that already, because it was nice to sort of to do it again, and sort of, I mean, you know, because obviously the Cornwall Station thing, although it was a lot of fun to play, it wasn't sort of so much fun in terms of other aspects of it. It was a bit of slight sort of damp squib ending, I suppose, particularly with the cancellation of the American tour and everything. So it was nice to sort of to get that away from that again, and do something, and also find out that a lot of people out there still wanted to listen to us, really, which was, of course,
which obviously we did. So I will leave you to the rest of your day, Tony. Okay, thank you very much for taking so much of your time to speak to us.
That's all right. That's great.
Thank you very much.
All right,
thank you. Bye now.
Okay, bye.
Stop. Yes.